Hello. Well, I want to thank you for joining me through all these lectures on the science of where or how to think spatially. This last lecture is on some summary and some final thoughts, and then give you a chance to do exercise number one again if you so desire. So let's jump into that. So let's overview. Let's remind ourselves what we've kind of learned through these 7 lectures and for doing the different exercises that have gone along with it. So, as you know, everyone has some ability to think spatially. Yes, you do. Okay. Don't worry, you do. Okay. And we know that the ability can be improved with awareness, practice, and sustained hard work. So, you've gotten the tip of the iceberg with these lectures, and hopefully, you've increased your awareness. And now you've been practicing, and maybe you'll spend some more time working hard on being a better spatial thinker. Spatial thinking is so important. It's a component of so many disciplines. We talked about STEAM, where we've added art to the science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think it's important that we understand that it's not just for the STEM disciplines, but it's also for everybody. And it's useful in everyday life. And the last lecture proved that. And hopefully you've thought of other good examples for yourself about that. So what's spatial thinking all about? Well, it's about space. It's about the location of objects initially, and then most importantly, their relationship to each other and the paths that they take as they move, which brings us all to put all that together to get our spatial reasoning and our inferences from all this spatial thinking that we're doing. Really important to understand that spatial thinking is not a substitute for verbal or mathematical thinking. It's not a learning style. It's something that you want to incorporate. It's another component of thinking that you want to have as part of your everyday life and part of your own specific discipline. So, spatial thinking is critically important. It's been so useful in so many great scientific discoveries. It's absolutely essential to many activities in today's modern workforce. And certainly you cannot survive very long if you're not a spatial thinker. Life will cause you lots of great problems beyond what they normally cause if you have no spatial thinking abilities at all. But everyone has some. Okay. It is interesting to understand that while fundamentally important, spatial thinking has been undersupported, underappreciated, undervalued, and underinstructed. In other words, pretty much ignored, which is why I put these videos together, and hopefully they're helping you. But I think there's a trend towards less spatial thinking in our education, and that is actually tragic. So hopefully you will be an advocate against that. So what are some key issues here? As I just said, we can ask ourselves, are we increasing or decreasing our spatial thinking? And I think we have to be somewhat aware that technology has tended to decrease our spatial thinking or our need to spatial think on our own. And the key example is certainly the GPS in our cars, but Google Maps or any other kind of mapping app, or just so many things that have taken the place of us having to think through the spatial process, where we have some technology do it for us instead. I think we have to be a little bit wary of that at this point and fight against that to keep our spatial thinking abilities. So the key question is there a difference between males and females in spatial thinking? You can go with all the different jokes about that. I'm not going to go into that myself, but on average, males seem to have more spatial thinking ability. However, and this is a huge however, anyone can have high or low spatial thinking ability. Okay, so if you're a male, don't go running around going, well, I have better spatial thinking ability because I'm a male. Or if you're a female, don't go running around going, well, I don't have any spatial thinking ability because I'm a female. That's completely wrong. Okay. Lots of females have much better spatial thinking ability than lots of males. However, if you averaged everybody, okay, then the first sentence is true. I don't tend to like to average too many people. So you have whatever spatial ability you have now, and hopefully you've improved it over these lectures and over the exercises. Spatial thinking, as we know, deals with space, the concept of space, which is why I call this series the science of where. It's really what it's all about. Okay. And then different ways to represent that space. And then finally, the reasoning by incorporating that space, right? By adding that spatial reasoning to those concepts and representations of space. And we absolutely know that our ability to think spatially increases with experience, especially for specific domain knowledge. Okay, so we talked a lot about different domains. If you go into the Learning to Think Spatially book that we used for this lectures, you'll find lots more examples of that. If you call up the literature, you'll find lots more examples of that. Okay. So maybe the biggest question of the day is, how do you know if you're a spatial thinker? How do you know if you're spatially literate? So ask yourself these following questions. Do you have a habit of mind of thinking spatially? Hopefully after these lectures you do. Do you practice spatial thinking in an informed way? I'm hoping you're answering yes to that at this point, because you have been informed about what spatial thinking is all about, and your awareness has increased tremendously. Okay. And then lastly, have you adopted a critical stance to spatial thinking? In other words, spatial thinking isn't the answer for every single situation, right? Are you using it where it's appropriate and using other kinds of thinking where they're appropriate? Okay, so do you know the difference? And then secondly, do you have or do you use the 4 competencies of spatial thinking? In other words, do you begin with this set of primitives or objects or building blocks or fundamental components? We've talked about this a bunch. Okay, and then have you added some languages? Again, the emphasis on languages, not a single language, but multiple languages of space. And we talked about different terminology for that. And then do you use those 2 things combined together to come up with some spatial concepts? And then most importantly, do you put all of that together to perform spatial operations? That's what it's really all about, right? That's where your spatial reasoning comes in. That's where you actually solve specific problems. And that's where you get the benefit out of going through these lectures and going through the exercises, because hopefully you're solving problems quicker. You're seeing new ways to solve problems. You're thinking more clearly about certain circumstances. It's just working for you better. That's great. Okay. The last lecture, we talked about how spatial thinking is everywhere and is in everything. It's fundamental to life, to everything that we do. Okay, and I know you're very aware of that at this point. It's part of your work. Even how you get to work every morning is spatial thinking. It's absolutely critical in the sciences. And so important. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Okay. And once you're aware of spatial thinking, my goal is that you'll find yourself doing it all the time, because you're aware of it now and you're now considering what you're doing. And because you're doing that, that will lead to very great improvements in your spatial thinking abilities. They build on each other. It continues to grow. You'll see more and more and more of that. And I'm super encouraged for you. And hopefully you're super encouraged with this short dedication to these lectures that you have grown tremendously in your spatial thinking skills. So what's the challenge? The challenge is for you to be an advocate for spatial thinking. Once you realize its value, I think it's something you can easily share with others. So I'm asking you to promote it in your home with your children, with your parents, with your friends, in your workplace. Show people that if they think of this solution with a spatial component, maybe they get there quicker. Maybe you come up with a better solution. And so be a spatial thinker. I do really appreciate so much that you've spent time with me through these lectures, and I do hope that you're a better spatial thinker and a more aware spatial thinker than you ever have been before. One last thing that you can do before we go is, if you want, you can now try exercise number 1 again. Okay? I think it's valuable to do this because you're more aware of spatial thinking, because you've got more insight into spatial thinking, and because you've had more practice in spatial thinking. It is worthwhile to try exercise number 1 again. Absolutely, you got to remember that you've only got 20 minutes. Okay? If you've done these lectures really, really quickly, it's possible that it hasn't been that much time between the time you did exercise number 1 the first time and now trying it a second time. You might want to wait a little bit of time, a week or something between things, as you grow in your spatial awareness. Okay, but please remember you only have 20 minutes. See if you can answer more questions this time. There's 45 questions, as you remember. Maybe you can answer more of them, and see if you can answer more questions correctly. Most of all, please have fun. Spatial thinking is fun. So many things we do are spatial thinking. And thanks for hanging in there, watching these lectures. And thank you for improving your spatial thinking. Have a great one.